Okay.
Hi, Martha.
Hi. Let me get that out. Hi. How are you?
Hi, Martha. How
Yes.
long have we known
Hi.
each other?
Uh, Maybe 15 or 20 years. It's a long time.
That's such a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that about us.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Really, you're like I've known you since I'm 30 years old, I think. Younger. I think you're
Yeah.
right. Maybe younger than that. 28. Yikes. Well, it's been a good
Yeah.
run.
Somewhere around there. A long
Good
time. I think
run.
it's more like 15 years, but it's a long time.
Yeah. I love the story of you. Can you tell us the story of you and how it's an unusual story. We have some people in common
Uh-huh.
that we both know.
Right.
And I said to one of them, I said, well, I've known Martha. I've known Martha since I'm 30 years old. And they said,
Mhm.
really? And I said, yeah. So tell the story of how I actually don't even know it, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't, when you say the story of me, I mean, there's a lot of parts of me, so I'm not quite sure which one or what you mean.
I
So
think
could
I mean,
you,
like, how did you come to feel that sugar was or that, your weight or sugar or your relationship with food
right.
was a problem? And how did you come to work with me when that wasn't the nature of our relationship when we first met?
No, yeah, that was pretty amazing. Well, first of all, I would say that my whole life I've had, yeah, not severe. Like I know some people have bigger gains and losses, but most of my life, there was a point in my life when I was pretty young, where I sort of turned around and said, "Oh my God, how did I get this belly?" And looking back on it now, I think it was, my first encounter with stress eating and things.
Mm.
I actually was. I started school when I was 5 because I have a late birthday. So I either had to
Oh,
start school at 7 or 5. And I was in first grade at 5, and I'm not very tall. So I was little for my age, and I was in
mm.
first grade, and I was in a school where I was one of the only white kids in the school. And I actually had a lot of friends from a lot of, it was on the West Coast. I had Asian friends, white friends, Black friends, but I also really was the target of a lot of hostility, which I completely get
Oh, that's so
now. But
interesting.
I would say I experienced bullying and physical violence, and I had to fight sometimes. And I think that that probably had a lot to do with my stress, and I didn't share it with my family. Because my parents were actually, my dad was the director of a hospital in Seattle, and their politics were that we should go to public school. They were very,
Mm.
in that kind of life. And so I sort of felt like a traitor that I was having any problems and I didn't share them.
Mm.
And I mean, in the way, I don't even want to complain about it, because I honestly think it shaped my life in a very positive way, that I never would have felt the way I feel now about race and difference, and what it means to be bullied, or to be in that situation. And so it was really a blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
So that
Well,
was
and
the
I
very
think
beginning.
thematically, I mean, I've listened to a lot of these stories, both on what you're craving and in my own support groups. And I think two things, right? Like this feeling of being different and not getting the handbook, that kind of thing, and being bullied
Mhm.
is really thematically common among many of
I
us.
know, that's why I mentioned it right away.
Yeah. And I also think, and I'm sure we'll get to this part of, seeing these tragedies as part of the building blocks of our life. And really, my definition of spirituality will always be, a shift in what you choose to believe,
Right.
as that. And we were just talking about this before the podcast, which I always just feel like I should record. But you were saying to me, like, how do you hold all this space for people? I worry about you. And I'm like, divine gave me a life where I can hold space for people, right? Like, and I could think of that as a great tragedy if I wanted to, right? Like, oh, I didn't get children, whatever. And I'm like, I'm pretty okay with that.
I think you're doing great.
But it makes a lot of sense, right? So you turn to
Right.
food to cope. You were one of those like me, like 4 years old, I was like, where are the churros? This life is not just, I don't want to be here. Right. Or this feels too hard. I don't know how to manage this life.
It was like subconscious. I just turned around and I was like, oh, because, you know, it always not been that way. And, you know, from there, I lived there for 3 years in Seattle. And then we lived overseas in Europe. And when we were in Europe, we were in Sweden, where everyone is tall and blonde. And so there were me and my brothers who were short and dark. And so I went from being the white kid in the black school to the black kids more or less in the white school. They had, at that time in history, they didn't have a lot of foreigners in Sweden, and they thought we were black.
Wow.
Sometimes. So we had to, I learned Swedish very quickly. And to the point where people thought I was Swedish, and even though I didn't look like them. And so that was all good. And then my parents divorced and I moved to Florida, and it was a very traumatic divorce. You know, there was violence in my family and things like that. And so when I got to Florida, we were there with nothing. It was a very sudden move. And everybody around me had a ton of money. And so again, I felt like a fish out of water.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, finally I went to college, and, you know,
Right.
then I realized I was gay. So of course, then I was a fish out of water again. And all that. So
you're my favorite fish, Martha. But were you?
But I really feel like, you know, all along that it is a benefit, because I think we're all fish out of water.
Me too. Me too.
And so when I later in life, when I had children, I always was like in the 30-pound range of gaining and losing weight. And if I counted all the weight I've lost over the years, it was probably, you know, 1,000 pounds, you know, literally. I mean,
but where did the food come in as a problem? Like, where did the food come in as, like, you know, where did it move from your solution to your problem? Like, when did you start the gaining and losing? Like, when did it occur to you, oh, I should go on this diet? Like, where was that in the story?
Well, you know, my biggest addiction is chocolate. And when I moved to Europe, the chocolate was just amazing, much better than American chocolate. And, you know, that became an addiction for me. But it was always, like I said, I wasn't like more than maybe 30 pounds, but 30 pounds is a lot on someone who's, first of all, a kid, or, you know, someone who's not tall anyway.
Well, 30 pounds is a lot on someone where it's not 30 pounds that you feel is supposed to be on your body. 5 pounds is a lot.
And so when I got into high school or junior high, you know, when people are starting to, you know, try to be good looking for other people and stuff, that's when I would diet and you know, gain and lose weight. And so in those days, it was more like protein shakes and fasts kind of thing, a lot of that. And in college, I did that too.
But it was in the service of fitting in, is what I'm hearing. You're like, oh, I want to look a certain way.
Well, that is sort of like fitting in, though, I think. Don't you think so? I mean, I think there's so much fat shaming and everything else that if you want to be, you know, you're living in Miami Beach and everyone's got their fancy cars and their fancy outfits, and you don't have any of that. And now you're fat too, so to speak, to use the feeling that I had.
Oh, Martha, by the way, it's not just you and I that agree with this. The research says that girls at the age of 6 start to want to look different. So, I mean, I think that's diet culture's got us hooked real early in this idea that there is an ideal that we should be striving for. And it's not the one that we're sitting in right now, for sure. And then I think, what you're saying, these vulnerabilities of, you're like me, like emotionally sensitive, you know, and when you have that empathic tendency to know that everybody's different and to have that feel unsafe, then you're going to do what you can. Right.
And because we came from this traumatic separation from my father, and it was really traumatic. And of course, in those days, you didn't talk about divorce, and nobody even knew that my parents were divorced. I think that added to eating. And, you know, the reason I mentioned switching countries like this is that, you know, often you hear about people, immigrants who come to the United States who never had a weight problem, but they start to gain weight here.
Mhm.
And when I came to the US, I mean, I was eating things I'd never seen before. And, you know, and we had no
There's so
supervision.
many on the shelf, right? You're like,
Right.
how
My
many
mom was-
cereals can I eat?
Yeah, exactly. And the cream cheese, I'd never had that. I loved it. So, you know, my mom worked full time and went to school at night, and there was so not a lot of supervision, and you just eat whatever you could get your hands on. So
Yeah.
I really had some bad habits there. But I think when it went from that yo-yo in that range is when I had my son. I had been on hormones in advance of that because I was, you know, getting pregnant artificially.
Mm.
And so after he was born, my weight skyrocketed. And I think, and I'm just theorizing because I'm not sure about this, but, you know, I did nurse exclusively for 6 months.
Mm.
And I believe that that drives your appetite like crazy.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that may have had a lot to do with it. Also, you feel like you really don't own your own body. I was so happy to have a baby, but, you know, nursing all the time
Mm.
on demand, and, you know, kids getting up at night and this and that, you really, women often talk about how they've given up their body to this other person. And for a while, that's, I think, what you should expect almost. You know, that is part of having a child. But I really put on a lot of weight after he was born. I went up to like 185, which
Wow.
again, for my height and everything else, is
Sure.
someone else's 250.
Mhm, right.
So, and again, I turned around and I was like, oh my God, what happened to me? So at that point, I started getting up really early in the morning and working out.
Mhm.
And I still work out, and it really did help me. I lost most of that weight and kept it off for the most part, but still back into that range of 20 to 30 pounds. So that's the long story with that. But
I have a
ahead.
curiosity about something you were saying, which is when you were saying like, oh, and then when you moved to the States and you were starting those diets and the shakes and the fasts, was everyone else around you doing that? And did it feel like an inclusive thing also?
I knew people that were doing similar things. Yes. You know, everybody was dieting. All the girls were dieting.
Right.
So, but I can't remember that there were some people who were doing like I was doing Slim Fast a
Yeah.
lot, you know,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So, that was not uncommon.
I think that's such like an important piece of diet culture, which is the camaraderie around, like when we're
Yeah.
feeling left out. It reminds me when I started smoking cigarettes too, because all the kids would go outside and smoke cigarettes. And I thought, well, I don't feel good about myself. I don't feel like I belong. Maybe I'll go smoke cigarettes. And I think the same can be with these diets. We can, you know, in Breaking Up with Sugar, there's this part in the divorcing dieting chapter where I say like, hey, you know, you might be all in on this, but you just wait till January 1st and you wait till the office all starts to go on a big weight loss challenge.
Right.
And see how committed you are to this new way of life. Like, it's an interesting thing about the peer pressure of dieting, isn't it?
Yes. When I took off all that weight, what I did myself is it was a pretty restrictive program that I put myself on. I was working out every morning. I did the step. If you ever had a step, but I had a video.
I was actually a step aerobics instructor for many, many, many years.
Well, I'll tell you, I like aerobics and I still do them. I just ran in the park today for 3 miles or over 3 miles. And I just feel like it's heart health and so many things. It really sets me straight. But on the other hand, the intake that I had, I would eat at that time, I ate meat. So I'd have like meat in a watercress soup.
Oh.
I got my protein, and watercress has so many vitamins in it. So I was getting what I needed, but it was pretty restrictive, and I lost
to say the least.
weight.
Watercress soup makes me want to binge my brains out.
Well, it was with the beef in it, it was, you know, not so bad. But on the other hand, I ended up losing that weight within 6 months. Which is pretty fast.
Very fast. I mean,
yeah.
And you know, a diet of watercress and beef soup would probably, you know, if you can grasp on that tight to do that, you know, consistently and compliantly.
I'm sure I had other things, but mainly that was
the main.
Yeah.
So where did food addiction come in, and where did your decision to break up with sugar come in? Like how did that happen?
Well, I mean, so after I took off all that weight, my vow was that I was never going to go back up to that high weight that I had, and
I
I
love
didn't.
that vow.
But I would go up 20 pounds or so, and I really wanted to get a grip on that. But I used to say to people, because I've given up other addictions. I used to smoke pot all the time. I did coffee. I don't eat meat. I eat fish and stuff. But so not that that's an addiction, but I've given up a lot of things in my life that I wanted to give up. When I say give up, I chose to do those things, right? But I actually, as you know, we know mutual people in common. And so I had heard that you put this book out, and I actually bought your book to support you.
That is so nice.
No, I really did, because you had helped someone that I really cared about. And long before you were into DBT, I believe.
Yeah, no, in my early years, 28, 29 years old.
You were such a great help that I said, well, I'll buy Molly's book, of course. So I bought it, and it sat on my shelf, and I'm sure other people say that all the time, because one of the things I used to say to people is, I can do anything, but I can't give up chocolate.
Right.
I really felt that way.
Gosh, I want you to I wish that could just be the title of this thing, because I think that is that's amazing. That's amazing.
So I then finally one day I said, oh, let me read the book.
To support me. Let me support her again. Let me read a few pages.
This was now curiosity, right? And as I was reading it, and I really didn't expect it to happen. Again, I know I see it on the Facebook page. People talk about it a lot. The Breaking Up with Sugar Facebook page, that is, where people say that they didn't think that that the book resonated so much with them. And so all those parts about sugar and flour and everything else, and I just started to feel like my yo-yoing my whole life and everything that I'd been through, that this was just maybe the reason.
Wow.
There was a lot of science in that stuff with the sugar and flour, and I related to that a lot too. So after I finished the book, I said, well, let me see if I can do this for a couple of days. And by the way, I also was big on artificial sweeteners. I never went anywhere without artificial sweeteners.
On your person?
Yes, I keep it, because I was using Truvia, because it's not it isn't as damaging, from a carcinogenic perspective. So I use that, but
I know, isn't that fascinating? I just love that about you. I was like that too. Like if we really watch that episode of Martha, of her making sure she always has her Truvia with her, that's straight dependency. That's like saying, oh, I can't live without it. And that's an attachment it's not like it's your asthma inhaler, right?
It was harder to give that up, I think, than a lot of other things.
I'm with you. Me too. The absolute
Coke,
hardest thing I gave up was artificial sweeteners, especially Diet Coke. The only thing I ever crave to this day is a Diet Coke.
Well, now I drink sparkling water.
Yeah, it's not Diet Coke, let's be honest.
You know what? I don't crave Diet Coke anymore. Right. I actually stopped drinking Diet Coke long before this. And I don't even really know why I did it, but because I read so much about how horrible.
It's pretty tough. It's pretty terrible. And, I once had, when I was moving out of an apartment that I lived in for 11 years, there was Diet Coke I had stashed. # she's an addict. And if I could tell you what this container looked like, it was an eroded container. It was like, oh my God, I can't I put this in my body. It's frightening. But for me, artificial sweetener too. And I think, we're not the same age, but I was raised to believe that artificial sweetener was good for me.
Yeah.
And it was a really much better, much healthier alternative.
Yeah.
And the science is so clear that is really the devil's greatest coup right there.
Absolutely. So
you said I could do it for let me try this for a day or two. And when you say, I want to get really specific, because spoiler alert, Martha hasn't had sugar for over 2 years. How exactly, when you say, I'm going to try this for a day or two, can you be really granular about what I'm going to try this meant for you?
Well, what I actually did is I said, let me see if I can do it for a week.
Okay.
All right. And so in order to do that, I took your book and I Xeroxed the back pages where you have the menus and the food plan,
Mhm.
right? Because I felt like I couldn't keep flipping in the book
Yeah, that's
to
really
find
annoying. I
the
agree.
breakfast choices and and all this stuff. So I had measuring cups and stuff like that. And I had
Oh,
also,
so you like went all in. You weren't just like, I'll just not have cookies, cake, and candy. You're like, I'm going to go all in on this thing.
oh yeah, no. I figured like if I don't do it that way, let me see if I can do this,
Okay, like real deal, do this.
Right. So I put together what I call that manual that it was
Yeah.
about 10 pages, and it had the first page is the 3 meals plus, what a meal constitutes and everything else, and then all the choices for breakfast, lunches, and dinners.
Mhm.
And I had to get rid of stuff in my house. And, like with this, just like with so many other things, you have to start reading labels and looking
Yep.
through your cabinets and all that, which I didn't start purging my cabinets, but I started reading I said, I can't have this, I can have this,
Mhm.
and all that. So,
So you started getting like super informed, it sounds like.
yeah. And I
But
did it.
Martha, did you find that so many people at the consideration of doing something like that gets, their back, like the hair really goes up on their back. Like, how did you, cause I know you have defiance in you, right? I mean, power of the people, right? Like,
Yeah.
how did that happen that you weren't like, I'm going to like, how did that go? How did you manage the defiance in you?
Because as I was reading the book, the resonance was there, and
Okay.
and also I just felt like I had reached a point in my life where I didn't want to keep yo-yoing. I really wanted to solve, like I said, I've had other addictions. I've had so many issues. I'm a cancer survivor for 10 years, and I've got overcome so many things, and I thought this is really the final,
Yeah.
the final thing, and I really wanted to do it.
And I love that I actually love the resonance because this is my story too, as you well know, but like, I love the resonance where you had this maybe graceful moment that said, what if it's the sugar that's preventing me from having freedom? Like, what if that's what's making me continue to binge, continue to yo-yo? Like, and I've said that to people in consultation, like, what if it's the sugar? What if this is actually where your freedom exists? And you're saying you heard that part.
Yeah, I did. And so I figured it's almost an experiment. I mean, let's see if I can walk through the fire of giving it up and then see how it affects me. And I also have a strong opinion that when anybody is stopping alcohol, cigarettes, smoking pot, or any drugs or any other addiction, that I feel that and this is just my opinion, that the best way to do it is all in, and not to just, wean away from it, because you're torturing yourself sort of.
I think that's true. I think some people need to do it that way, but man, for me too, it's like, I was just laying on the floor, hysterical crying, but I don't know if I could, I don't know if I would have had the tolerance to do it in a long way. Some people that works for them.
Yeah, I'm not judging anyone else, but for me, it's like a tease, and
Me
it
too.
just makes it worse. So
Yeah.
I did it for a week, and I got through the worst part of it. And
What was the worst part of it? What was the worst part of it?
The first few days, and the worst part of the worst few days is that my one thing that I really love in the morning is my coffee. I'm a very early bird. At this point, I have a whole morning ritual that takes quite a while, but that's part of my peace. That creates my peace.
I want to bookmark that because I really want to talk about that. But let's
whatever piece I have.
Yeah,
but so I thought, oh God, how am I going to have my coffee? Now I have to have 2 glasses of milk a day because I have osteoporosis.
Mhm.
All right. So I wasn't going to, I know that, you're supposed to have, I think whole milk as opposed to skim milk, but I have skim milk. I have, I want to keep my cholesterol down. And so
And let me say, supposed to, like, as I'll say to the day I die, you do you, boo, right?
Yeah, I know.
You do you, boo.
Yeah,
you want to do skim milk, you go ahead, go on with your bad self, go on with your bad self and your skim milk, Martha.
Right. So I'd measure out 2 cups of skim milk, 1 cup of unsweetened cashew milk, and 1 cup of coconut milk. And so this is how I got through the first few days, and I still do it. And so I perk my coffee, and then I'm like a barista because I actually stovetop my coffee.
Yeah, I
do
kind of want to come
stovetop
over for a
first.
cup of coffee. Let me tell
Yeah,
you.
I really make a good cup of coffee. Anyway, so I'd also heat the milk like latte, and I would add to it, when I put it in the cups, unsweetened cocoa.
Oh,
And
perfect.
that to me is one of the saving graces for me, because I do like the taste of chocolate. And of
Mhm.
course it's much different without sugar in it, but I like it. And
Mhm.
so that sort of was my water wings, and it got me through that. And I still use it.
Water wings. I love
Yeah,
it.
you
I
know?
love it. And so
So
then what happened? So you were able to, how were you able to do it? Like in the first 7 days, how did it go?
well, I was on the Facebook page a lot,
Okay.
and I shared with people, and we were all really new to it. I was
Yeah.
lucky, in fact, because the book had just come out, and so there was a group of us, some of whom, as you know, are still with the group,
Lots of whom are
that
still.
we talked about the same things. And I see that still happening now. But, we were like a group of people talking about the first few days and
Yeah.
all that. And that was very helpful.
And the coffee
That
thing was big in that group in the beginning. I mean, it was so funny over at MC headquarters. We were like, we're going to get ready with the feelings charts. We're going to get ready with, and all anybody wanted to talk about was how do I drink my coffee unsweetened? We were like,
Yes.
oh, this is pretty basic in the beginning.
Yes.
We all had forgotten, we'd all forgotten that.
And I think that after about a week or maybe 2 weeks, your taste buds really do change a little
It's
bit.
amazing, isn't it?
And you don't really, I mean, I don't even want sugar in coffee. Sometimes I have cravings to have something sweet, but I took someone out for her birthday last night, and she had a dessert. He was going to, the restaurant was so nice. They were just giving us the desserts because we said it was her birthday. And I said, I don't eat sugar. No, thank you. So I said, I'll have some coffee. And he said, well, do you want artificial sweeteners? I said, no, I don't want artificial sweeteners. But I mean, I didn't even miss it. I mean, there are times when I do have cravings for sugar.
Yeah.
But and I'll have like too much fruit, or one of my bad things, quote unquote, is my contraband is I have dried unsweetened cranberries, and I'll have some of those. And I know that you're not supposed to have dried fruit.
Well, as once again,
yeah,
totally untrue. You do you, boo, right? Like that's to me,
right.
like you're supposed to, because you do.
Right.
Right. Like that's like, like I did this post the other day and I wrote, public service announcement, your food will never be perfect.
Yeah.
And a woman wrote to me and she said, does that mean I'm allowed to eat whatever I want? And I wrote, well, first things first, you're allowed to eat whatever you want. There are a few freedoms left in our country. This happens to be one of them. You do you. But it's funny how much in diet culture, it's just entrenched. Right. Like, I think that sounds like unsweetened dried cranberries are on your plan because you eat them, own it.
Yes.
Right?
No, I am owning it. But, one of the things that you said, of course, the other fortunate thing was that there was a pandemic when we started out. And that actually made life a little easier for me because I wasn't socializing. I wasn't going to restaurants. And so I could live in a controlled environment. And you did those nice nightly podcasts with the Close the Kitchen, which was really amazing. And I mean, I really feel very fortunate that I came upon this at that time. And you said something very early on, which of course you've said many times since, but it just again resonated with me because it was my stage, where you said something about flour and sugar just not being your food. And the reason why it resonated is because I don't eat meat. And I haven't eaten meat for over 20 years. And I do really feel, I mean, I eat fish and I eat everything else, but I don't eat meat. And when it comes to that, I really feel like it's not my food.
Yep. So you're not sitting at a restaurant being like, am I good? Am I bad? Should I have the steak? Like, right? Like that's not your conception.
Food.
You're like,
What's really funny is because now I have several food restrictions, right? Because I don't eat meat and I don't eat flour, sugar. And I find that when I go to restaurants with friends, and they're really my friends, they're like, they'll look at the menu in advance for me and I go, oh, do you know they have this and they have that? And I've gotten to the point where I say, Yeah, I'll figure it out. Don't
Yeah.
worry about it. It's
But
not-
it is, I wonder, like, cause I think, I mean, I've done this 13 years now, but like my friends will make wings and they'll say, you know, we left 8 over there that we only did a rub on and we
Oh,
didn't
that's
put, and I'm
different.
like, wow, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
no, that's different. But when you go to a restaurant, I think I wouldn't ask you, I wouldn't look at the menu for you and tell you this is what you can have. But one thing I always carry with me now, I have a little stasher bag, and I always carry 2 Wassa crackers in it.
Love that. I love that about you. You BYOC, you bring your own carb. You're a
Right.
BYOC.
Yeah. So when I'm at a restaurant, I can take those out and I can have a bread with a little, butter on it when everyone else is having rolls or whatever it
that.
is. And I brought my thing. I went to a pasta restaurant last week. It was only pasta. And the reason I went is that the person I was meeting was coming into town, hadn't been here for a long time. She's ill. And I said, you pick the restaurant. And she said, oh, I know we have food restrictions. I said, no, you pick the restaurant. You pick the restaurant. So when I looked at the menu in advance, it's called Pasta Louise. It was really not my food. All of it. All of it.
What did you do?
Well, I got a Caesar salad
Uh-huh.
without the croutons. And I asked for the dressing on the side. And of course, I brought my Wassa crackers, but I also, and this is very unusual, I grilled a piece of salmon in advance. I had it in my bag and I broke it up on the salad.
Huh.
And I told her in advance, when I got there, I said, I wanted to come here for you. And so I hope you don't think it's weird, but I'm going to drop my salmon on here. Nothing,
I wonder, I think what I might have done is asked them if they could have put some of the stuff on top of the pasta on the side and ordered the Caesar salad. I'm just trying to think as the listeners
I did
listening.
get some spinach on the side and stuff like that.
Right. But sometimes they put like chicken or shrimp in pasta, and I might have said, hey, can you give me some of that chicken marinara? I've done that. I just always want people to think of other things they could do at a restaurant.
No, I hear you. And I've done that too. But in this case, it really seemed like, it was it was one of the more challenging places I've been.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, and I don't know. It's funny, like maybe it's in the last few, I think it's because since I moved to the South, there's like a couple of times, like, or one time somebody recommended, or somebody said, hey, there's a new friend, and they said, let's go. And it was like this biscuit shop. And I texted the menu over to someone in BUWS that we both know. And I said, I'm hard pressed to say this.
Yeah.
I said, I don't think I can eat here. The way I would have had to eat there was, like I would have had to have like, it was just been a very sad meal. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be friends with this person for a long time, so it's not the same situation as you.
Yeah.
I might as well put it out there that I'm not a big biscuit eater, and I said, like, we just try somewhere else. And we did. And those are hard things to do, I think, in the beginning. Let's talk about what you were hoping to find from breaking up with sugar and changing your whole relationship with food, and what you did find, and what did you think, and what do you know?
Well, I wasn't thinking that when you talk about changing your whole relationship with food, that was to me was something sort of abstract that I didn't fully understand, but I thought, great, if that can happen, whatever. I wanted to take weight off and keep it off for a change. And that was probably my main objective in the beginning. But what I found was, and I think, again, I'm sort of a science-oriented person. And so I've always talked about my eating in terms of, well, you get hungry, which is, there are truths to some of these things. I think we get hungrier at night because our metabolisms are already fired up from the whole day, as opposed to in the morning when you wake up, most people aren't as hungry when they get up as they are later in the day. And that's one of the challenges to close the kitchen. But then there's this whole other emotional aspect.
Yeah.
Now, and so I got much more enlightened about the emotional triggers for food and the tools to not give in to these cravings. I did do the ice pack thing, and I still would do it, but I just don't like it that much. So
well, it's not that likable, but it sure does perk you back into, it really does start that sympathetic nervous system. So it shocks you back into reality.
Right. I think the biggest change for me is really and I knew about it before this, but it's just been a bigger tool in my life, is aspects of Buddhism and meditation And, I read Pema, I read Tara Brach, and I listen.
Pema Chodron, she's speaking of, which highly recommend anything that woman has written. Please read. Well, can stop there because I want to understand how did breaking up with sugar
Lead to that.
Lead to you becoming more Buddhist? I mean,
well, again,
walk me through that.
I had an awareness of Buddhism. I have friends that have been into Buddhism always. And when I was ill with really what should have killed me, a friend of mine gave me a 6-series CD set of Tara Brach's called Radical Acceptance.
It's a beautiful thing. Yeah, I've listened to that. It's amazing.
That's such a great piece. And so that I've always sort of like, I've always leaned that way for that reason. But on the other hand, the meditation, just doing meditation once a day.
Where did it occur to you from healing a relationship with food, reading a book because you wanted to, buying a book that you want because you wanted to support somebody. Thank you. Having this having this inclination to read it, reading it, having it resonate, taking the instructions, doing them.
Right.
And then starting to integrate some of these Buddhist practices. I'm missing that link. Like, where did it occur to you?
I can't be completely sure about how it started, but we talked about online, and you talked about, having a morning ritual, for instance. And it's as an example, during the pandemic, because I was very strict about the pandemic. I get up at like 4 a.m, and I'm a block from a big park, and I'd go up to the park and I'd walk into the big meadow there, and I'd sort of say a prayer every day.
Wow.
And that's something I never did. And so that may or may not have been related to breaking up with sugar, but it was just something that came to me that I felt that I wanted to do. And I was never like that before. Wow. And then people talked about meditation as a tool. Now, meditation is not necessarily a prayer, right? But I started to try meditation for 5 or 10 minutes a day. It was recommended to me by somebody with Beacon. And so I started doing it, and it was really hard. Pema, of course, all the things that I've read there, she talks about it. And I stopped worrying about not thinking when you meditate. Wow. And just sort of like sat with myself and tried on a daily basis to with how I was feeling that day. I started journaling, and these are all things that you recommended. So
yeah, it's an interesting story of willingness too, right? I mean, of course, like, I think if you're going to not be on a diet and you're going to be in a relationship with food, then you probably have to shift a belief system. And one of the greatest ways to shift a belief system is to start early and start in the morning, and to start practicing things to get you in touch with yourself, right? To get you tapped in and not scared of yourself and not hating yourself. And I think I'm with you on metabolism, but in my experience, that nighttime gets quiet. And when it gets quiet at night, the vultures start squawking, and what a really quick, efficient way to get the vultures to stop squawking is to feed them.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you 100%. I think you keep asking the same question, like, how did it all come together? And I think part of it is because I'm not young. And I think that I was just sort of tired of, as I said, of this whole syndrome or repetition. Yeah. And I said to myself, which I have learned from, past addiction therapy, is my thinking got me here. So let me just put my thinking aside and apply what you're recommending.
I mean, I love that. And I've heard the same thing in those circles where they say, and if it doesn't work, we'll refund your misery. Like, people have already made this decision. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday who really needed inpatient treatment. Yeah. I was explaining that to her, and she said, literally, I'm saying, it sounds to me like the best thing for you to do is go to an inpatient facility. And she said, well, I can't afford it, and I don't have the time, and I really can't afford it. And I said, what would it be like if you called and you had them tell you that she had already made the decision that she couldn't afford it and that it wasn't going to work about 32 seconds after I had suggested it. Right. And so there is this piece of even your 7-day decision that supports maybe this could work because you're giving it a chance to
Mhm.
work.
Mhm.
And I love that. I mean, where our negativity bias is so supreme, right? And our brain wanting us to be safe and not happy is
Mhm.
so embedded that we've
Mhm.
already decided, like, I mean, it's really interesting, Martha, right? Because you're like, in 2019, you would have said, "Oh, I'm so excited about your book, but I could never stop eating chocolate."
Yeah.
That's not my truth. Like what I
Yeah.
say about coffee, that's not my
Yeah.
truth. I'm not interested.
Right.
But it's interesting because you actually could, as it turns out.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And that's one of the biggest accomplishments of my life is that I don't eat chocolate. That's I mean, there's chocolate in my house because I live, with my wife, and there's other people here, and I don't, I see it, and it's like, oh, not my,
Not
there's
my
steak in
food.
the freezer. I don't eat steak either.
Right, right, right. What parts of this are easier than you imagined, and what parts are more difficult than you had imagined?
Um, I think that the easier parts are that once you do this for the snow groove,
Right.
that once you establish a snow groove where you've done it for, it depends. I think each person is different, by the way,
Me
on the
too.
snow
Where
groove.
did it sort of shift for you? Do you have any idea about the timing?
Certainly the first week to 10 days were the hardest.
Yeah.
So then it got a little easier. But I used to have a lot of anxiety just about going to a restaurant or an event, a wedding or this or that. And I don't have that anymore.
Yeah. That's
Because,
amazing.
but now that took a year or so to really change,
Yeah, but
right?
that's not that long of a time if you really think. I mean,
Yeah, I think the 66 days thing, I mean, I don't know where 66 days came
no,
from,
we
Frank.
found the research. Alex, my writing partner, I said, you have to I said, go do research and tell me the soonest amount of time that you
Okay,
can get automacy. And she is an amazing
right.
researcher. And she
Some
said,
people get it sooner,
yeah,
right?
I think
But
so.
I
I think
but I
so.
have to tell you that I think that for really, and I think I'm still working on it, honestly, 2 years later, sometimes. But it definitely is like a slow progression towards, I mean, I feel like so much more normalized now in the
Yeah.
program than I did before. And so now and then the demons come into my head and I want too much peanut butter, and I'll have an Atlas bar, which I know is on the program if you really want it.
Yeah.
But there are times that I think that when it comes to ED, that I do binge. If I had to say I had a disorder, it would be binge and purge kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so I think that I'm doing a lot less of that.
Yeah. Isn't that
Maybe,
amazing? Yeah.
yeah, it used to be like once a week, even as long as recently as 6 months ago. But
Yeah.
now it's much
Yeah.
less.
Gosh, one of my spiritual advisors, she always says this thing, and I want to punch her in the face, even though I love her more than life. And she says, time takes time. And it's such an annoying thing, isn't it? Because I think that's what you're saying. You're like, well, about 2 years and change into it,
Yeah.
my overeating episodes decreased. And I bet you if I talk to you next year, you'd have more data on what started to heal and what started to heal. But it sounds like you're really on a healing path.
Oh, definitely. And I don't feel like I'm suffering, or anything like that. I
I
mean,
love that.
I think it's so much more normalized that I do feel that I'm well, maybe I'll never be perfect. I mean, after all, I'm 68 years
Also, I don't
old.
think anyone's perfect, if we want to just put that out there.
Right, of course not. But I mean, if I was doing things the other way for 66 years, then how can I expect that even in 2 years that everything's just,
Right.
I'm
Exactly.
I'm a model of good behavior, and
Right.
so I accept that.
So one more question. And you are very active in that Facebook group. And seen you write really beautiful things to this question. So I'm curious to know, like, what would you want to say to somebody who's struggling or who struggled like you struggled, and saying, like, good for you, Martha. I can't do this.
Um, I think people have to do this when they're ready.
Mm,
I may not be the full answer that you would want me to tell people, but I try not to give too much advice. I used to give advice and try to fix things for other people a lot more than I do now. But I think that people need to reach down into themselves And as you said before, I think that we'll refund your misery. That is just so true. And I think if, I've brought a couple people on board to this program, and they're very, very glad that they got here. Some of whom I communicated with for a long time before they ever got to a place where they read the full book and everything else. And I think that, people have to reach their point of no return, their bottom.
Yep.
Like with any addiction. And so when they can recognize that flour and sugar is their bottom in terms of the solution of getting a grip on this, then that's when they'll do it. And when they're ready to, there's a whole community of people that will support them and, keep them going.
I love that. And I love you. And I'm so excited to have had you on the podcast. Thank you
Thank you
so
very
much, my friend. And hey, thanks for your support.
Oh, I've bought the book for like 8 people. So,
Thank you times 8. And thank you for life. And thank you for knowing me and loving me for so long. You're wonderful, such a beautiful part of our community. And I love you very much.
I could never thank you enough.
All right. Thanks, Mama.
Thank you.